Hey, good afternoon, everyone. How are we all holding up this afternoon? Oh, yeah, that's the level of yelling I was expecting at this time of the day. This is the final session for GCAP this year. You've made it, but we're still only about halfway through Games Week, so we've got a bit of a slog to go. We do have a fantastic closing keynote speaker today. It's Dr. Brendan Keogh, who is an Australian Research Council Fellow in the Digital Media Research Centre at QUT. He's also taught game design, he's an author, he's written a bunch of articles all across the internet. If you haven't consumed his work, I highly recommend it, but also he's going to be chatting to us right now. So I suppose in a way that is also consuming his work. Please welcome him to the stage, everyone.
Sweet. Wow, this is really weird. Hi, everyone. Hope you look forward to consuming my content. Cool. So, yeah, this is me. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Terry, for making the keynote. I'm really glad that happened. It's exciting. So we'll see how this goes. Cool. So I'm going to talk about what Australian game makers told me about making games in Australia. I'll explain what that means soon. I work on like a slide a minute kind of thing, just so I know what I'm getting at. There is a lot of text on these slides because I'm an academic and I have a lot of exciting things to show you. There's like a Google Doc on that tiny URL. It's got a link to a PDF of the slides if you want to follow at your own pace or like spend more time on the numbers and stuff that I'll be flicking through. And also links to the other things I'm saying, there are links to in that. So you have like 10 seconds to get that if you really want it. 10, 9, 8, tinyurl.com/GCAP links. Cool. You got it. Cool. So, yeah, so my name's Brendan Keogh. Thank you, Ray, for thoughtfully not taking my entire mandatory away on my slide, and that would have freaked me out. So I'm a researcher. I'm sometimes a game critic. Used to write for like Polygon, Edge, and places like that before I got an academic job at Pays consistently. Used to teach game design. Have made games sometimes. They're pretty trashy. I don't recommend them. But I can make the claim that Dan Golding, who did the music for Goose Game, and Frog Detective made music for a little golf game I made. So I feel like a real game developer now. And I help run the Squiggly River Game Collective with Erica Vakai up in Brisbane. And I'm currently doing a DECRA, which is, I suppose, the main reason I'm here. And a DECRA is a Australian Research Council funded thing. So I have 3 years to do a large research project. And I don't have to teach in that time. I get to focus on my research, and I have money to do the research, which is very privileged and very exciting as an early career researcher. And so I pitched this project about the Australian game industry because I'm very interested in the game industry. I've spent a lot of time around it. I know lots of people in it. It's a cool thing. But I kind of, I guess, had this skepticism at the statistics that we normally see in terms of just how many people work at how many companies and what's their average salary. And those numbers are really, really important and accurate and valuable, but I always just felt like there's all this other stuff that wasn't really being captured by it. In the same way that like how many people work in the music industry isn't telling you how many people play music. And there's always going to be a lot of overlap between the two of those. In a music industry, there's always going to be new talent coming through the scene or the hobbyists or the bedrooms. And I was like, well, I felt like we weren't really good at accounting for that around games. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to talk to a lot of game developers or game makers in Australia from different walks of life and just kind of see what else is beyond those industry statistics, I suppose. Like not replacing them, not refuting them, but just what else is out there. So I spoke to too many people. I've been pitching, this makes no sense to most people, but I'm like kind of like Cara Ellison, but with money. In that I didn't need to sleep on anyone's couch. Check out Cara Ellison's Embed With Games. It's very, very good. So I went around Australia. I did a lot of interviews with a lot of different game developers of different walks of life, as well as educators, students, government agency representatives. I haven't done all of those yet. I didn't get to Perth or Canberra or Darwin yet, and apologies. Those people, I'll try to get there at one point. It took longer than I anticipated. And I've done some interviews overseas, partly with Australians who left Australia and haven't come back yet and maybe working in AAA, as well as indies in other countries to kind of compare. And I have a survey, that got 282 responses for the other people. that survey is technically still open because I never closed it down. If you would like to go fill it out, there is a link on the linky link. Please do that. More data is always good. Cool. So in this talk, what I really want to focus on, so this is a taxpayer-funded research project. I'm 2 years into it. It's 3 years long. The Australian games community has probably given me about, 150 to 200 hours of their collective time and a lot of insights, and been really nice to me and given me swipe cards into the arcade so I don't have to annoy people every single interview. So I feel like I should probably try to disseminate this research back to the community of taxpayers, maybe, that it most impacts, I suppose. So that's what I wanted to do today. And that's really stressful since I'm not a game developer. Well, I am a game developer. I'm not a professional game developer. And it's mandatory to feel imposter syndrome at GCAP, it seems. And also just you guys, you all told me this, right? And now I'm just telling you what you told me. And that seems strange and weird. And of course you already know this. But I guess what I'm hoping to do is I don't know, give a sense of the broader sense across the community, across the industry, so that you're like, oh, I thought I was the only one, and actually everyone's in that same boat, to nod to the theme. Yeah, and kind of give a sense of trends, give a sense of common experiences, challenges, light the way, if you will. I guess some caveats before I really start. It's quite Australian-centric what I'm talking about, but I think it'd still be relevant to people who've come over from other places in the region that maybe also don't have big, massive studios. It's not a biz dev talk. Philip Mays from Mighty Kingdom gave a really good talk yesterday about where the industry came from, where the industry is going, investment, stuff like that. That was good. Check out that, however it's possible to do that if you want that side of things. This is more about individual experience, about the humans who are making games in Australia and how those humans feel about that and what the vibe is, I suppose. So, yeah, so that's my caveat. And I'm probably going to end up just saying everyone feels like X a lot just because I'm freaking out up here. And I mean many people feel like X, and that's just going to happen. Let's just roll with that. Cool. Let's get proper started. So the global game industry, we like talking about how much money the game industry makes to feel culturally validated. We really like to talk about how we make $130 billion a year, or what it's worth that much. I don't know what that means. And that's true, it is worth that much. But 44% of that is 5 companies. 2/3 of it is 13 companies. This is from Newzoo, one of those data things. You can access that for free. So there's still a third of that, of whatever $130 billion is. That's still a lot of billions of dollars left over, but a lot of it is in a very small area. Philip said, so if he's wrong, blame Philip, that Fortnite made in 10 days what Australia made in all of 2017, and that the Australian game industry made 0.06% of the global game industry's revenue in 2017 as well. Again, if those are wrong, blame Philip. I just stole those from his talk. But it sounds about right. But why I bring that up is not because, oh, we're really small, oh, we're insignificant, whatever, but just there's this weird disconnect between how we talk about video games to our governments, to journalists, to different kinds of investors outside of video games, and the lived experiences of most people making video games, right? We talk about how much money this industry's worth. It's worth more than movies if you ignore merchandising, but it's not actually worth more than movies. I hate that stat. But yeah, most people aren't actually making bank. Most people aren't super rich. Most people are in all sorts of different situations. So let's look at Australian game making at a glance in terms of what people have been telling me over the last while. So I had a Google sheet as well, and you can get the link to this in the links. And I just asked people, if you release a game in 2018, just add it to this sheet. And I got 196 games added to that. I assume there's a bunch more that didn't see the sheet. I was just tweeting it out. So there's probably well over 200 Australian games made in 2018. 65% of the ones that got added were completely free or pay what you want. So released on itch.io or maybe elsewhere. So that I think that speaks to the high level of just kind of low scale, informal kind of activity that's happening around Australia at that student, experimental, hobbyist, whatever kind of side of things. Sorry, my graphs are just copy pasted from Excel because I did that then found out I was a Keynote. I would have done it anyway, that's no excuse. I don't know what it looks like, yeah, apologies. So in terms of my survey respondents, of like the 282 people that responded, most were in that hobbyist, student, enthusiast kind of group. I asked people to identify which one of these most reflects what you do, right? Because I didn't want to ask people, what was your salary? And they're like, I just make gains on a Saturday, but I still wanted to account for those people. Second, most people are employed at companies, and yeah, you can see the others. So that's kind of a split in terms of where people are at, in terms of who replied to this. Where people are located, everyone's in Victoria, nah, jokes. Quite spread out, actually. Like, unsurprisingly, Victoria's the highest one, perhaps. But then, you know, Queensland and New South Wales, not far behind, and everyone else. I got 2 from Northern Territory, finally. Sweet, one of them's here. Cool. So yeah, there's a lot of people out there that aren't in Victoria, much to the shock of every Victorian game developer. I promised I wouldn't make that joke. So anyway, in terms of like gender of people who replied, like gender was just a field. People could put whatever they want in there, and I didn't get a single silly joke about like trucks or anything, which is great. I think that says a lot about the maturity of the industry. But like 78% were male, or synonyms of male, like man or dude, whatever. People like, I condensed them. 14% said they were women, and the other 16% were like non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, pansexual. Most of those were non-binary, but there was a range of different identities there, and 2% didn't want to say. And this is, I guess it's worth noting, if you look at, say, the IGDA Developer Satisfaction Survey, or I think the GDC State of the Industry one, this is pretty much in line with those. So it's still pretty grim in some ways, but also in like the 2012 Australian Bureau of Statistics, like we were 8.7% women, so it's better, but it's not good. 95% were Australian citizens, 2.5% identified as being Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander descent, which I thought was shocking, and then I just Googled what like percentage of Australia is Indigenous, and it was 3%, and that was also shocking, so I don't know what to make of that. And this is totally on me. I didn't ask another question about cultural ethnicity, so I can't answer that. That was an oversight on my behalf. But a GDAA survey from 2018, which is still only on their Facebook page, like make a PDF of it once you're not dealing with GCAP. You're good, Terry. Had like, it was like 90% Caucasian or something. It was pretty shocking. So Australian game industry still has a real multiculturalism issue, or lack thereof. Cool, I have like no idea how long I'm going. Sweet, all right, I'm good. Cool, so at a glance, in terms of what people told me, in terms of like what kind of things people are saying, I guess these were like the pros and cons, and these are very broad, and I could probably name a million more, but I was trying to like, what's actually most relevant to the people sitting in this room. Pros first, I'm doing like a shit sandwich kind of a keynote here. It's gonna get grim for a while, then hopefully happy again. Like giving students feedback. Sweet. Anyway, so the pros, so it's like, you know, this really fierce independence and like really innovative, right? The whole story post-GFC, you know, figured out what to do without any support. Like Rudd gave us some money, Abbott took it away again. Still don't know why. Just wanted to buy some onions. And this real sense of just like, you know, we built this ourselves, this real pride in it, and I think that's really great. Really competing on a global scale, like a whole bunch of games just like, you know, just blowing everyone's socks off all over the world. You know, multiple games of the IGF every year. Like Trent Custers was hosting the IGF the other year, like that was a strange one. And just doing a lot with very little, right? And just a really diverse, like, I just showed like the lack of diversity in terms of, I suppose, gender and race, but like this diverse range of identities in terms of what kind of people are making games, for what reasons, driven by what kind of ambitions and what kind of backgrounds in terms of skill, and that really strong sense of community. Like all of these things are really, really positive about Australia, and in some ways quite unique, I think, compared to some other places in the world. On the flip side, there's very few resources available. Everyone's just stretched incredibly thin. Like everyone's just like really feeling the pinch just all the time. This kind of deep sense of instability and unpredictability. People just don't know what's going to happen like next week, let alone in 5 years. Everyone's exhausted, same. Just lots of people leave after not very long. And if all sorts of infrastructural issues, right? Like the NBN being bad. Tasmanian game devs did not complain about this. The lack of the lack of government understanding at like that federal level, like in terms of funding, but also in terms of like visas, in terms of like the other screen industries getting tax offsets, in terms of what do I choose when I do my taxes? Like, what do I put down? Am I software? Am I an artist? What is that? And that general cultural perception, we know all those things. And I really just want to talk about these three, I suppose. Three, there's more than three of them. Those ones, in terms of just like zoom in on those as kind of ones that are maybe most immediately relevant to this crowd, and that won't just be telling you stuff you already know, hopefully. And I think I'm already taking longer than I meant, so I'm just going to run ahead with it. So everyone's stretched really thin. If you're looking at a PDF, like yes, I said this morning, nobody has any money. I changed it. Some people have money. So look, so I asked people, like, how much money did you make in the last year? Again, this is shocking, but this is why I put the link up, because you can't read this, I know. And there's a really, really wide variety of incomes. For the people who said they work at a company, you know, a lot around that 50 to 80K mark, but also a lot way less, like 12%, so 10 people who are working, that's 12% of people who said they're working at a company, said they earned less than $1,000 in the last year. So that's a bit shocking. 75%, where am I? 75% of hobbyists not making any money, that's probably less surprising. 11% in that $1 to $100 range, including me. Yeah, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but like people are all over the shop, right? Really wide variety of incomes. And a thing I'd hear over and over again in interviews was, if I wanted to make money, I wouldn't have got into games. That really weird jarring with the, you know, that weird, sexy tech industry, entrepreneurial startup, Minecraft, whatever feeling of like, oh, game devs are like millionaires because it's tech. And like most people are like, no, like that's not why I'm making games. I'd like to be sustainable, I'd like to eat, I'd like to have a house. But like I also, that's not my primary driver here. Yeah, cool. Slides that are blue are quotes from people. It's all anonymized. I'd appreciate it if you don't go up to someone and go, hey, was that you? Because in case it was, then they don't want to say, so try to keep it anonymized. So there's this real lack of like, or a sense of a lack of upfront investment opportunities, like getting money in at an early stage to really help. This sense that like, you know, publishers kind of increasingly come in later, like after your trailer goes viral, and then the publisher go, oh yeah, like it's not risky now, I'll give you some money. But there's that whole like pre-production stage and most of the production where people just have no income and really struggle to get income, and their last game didn't necessarily cover it, or it's their first game. Usually it's everyone's first game. Platforms just take a cut and don't really do anything. You know, it's stretched really thin. And so people putting savings in, people like are a founder of one company and they're contracting at another 3 companies to pay their staff for that. It's like really scrappy. People are all over the place. Obviously there's government funding, like especially here in Victoria, which is great. But it's quite, you know, small compared to salaries, right? And people would say that they're kind of in like a perpetual startup mode, perpetually just like getting off the ground and not really getting to that level of sustainability where they can just kind of relax a little bit. I guess this is reiterating that point of that scrappiness, and just this is exactly why I get a bit suspicious of the industry statistics, because it's like what is a company essentially when we say there's this many companies, and like when people are like, I'm not an employee, I own the company, I can be a bit creative with the accounting to underpay myself, just so that the company can stay afloat, almost like a film set village or something. And they're not like shell companies, they're not fake, they're just like working at a much lower range of resources and scrappiness than maybe we're used to understanding a company. And this is something that I think newcomers to the industry don't often realize, especially students. And I would like more students to realize this is what they're actually getting into, not because they shouldn't, but because they'll be a bit more prepared for it. Yeah, and kind of just everyone's waiting to make it, right? Everyone's just waiting to be at that point where they can just have enough money to do the next thing. They just want one of those games to pay off, but not really much sense of having a sense that there's something they can do to make it pay off. The room's really silent. I'm sorry, it's going to be negative for a bit. It'll get positive again. I'm really sorry. And so everyone's working at a really small scale, right? Like most people I spoke to, probably like 1 to 5 people in their company. And like most game companies of the world are actually quite small. And like we just get obsessed with AAA as is what the game industry looks like, 'cause that's just what it did look like for a while. And there's a whole bunch of really good things about that, but that's not what most game companies look like, right? So most people are working at very, very small scale, which means there's kind of a fuzziness of roles, as Ricky said this morning, in terms of just like, I would just start an interview, right, what's your job title? and that took like half the interview sometimes. It's like, well, this week I'm producing, I suppose, or this week I'm talking to Apple or whatever. So that was really surprising to me. I didn't expect that. Of course, when I did interviews in AAA studios overseas, it was like 2 seconds. It's like, this is my role, cool. And that leads to burnout, right? That leads to people feeling responsible for everything, because kind of everything's their responsibility. And of course, you have all that contract work. You have all that kind of gig work where like, so many people don't have ongoing employment. They just have, well, we have 3 months until the next funding round, and we'll see what happens after that. So everyone's a lot of people are in that situation. Other consequences of this, like lots of people are doing really innovative stuff in like, applied games, serious games, and like getting like more stable income from that, which isn't like, it's not a gamble, right? You're like, we will pay you X amount of dollars to do this by this deadline. Sweet, that's nice and smooth. And people enjoy doing that, it feels good, it's good social outputs often. But they also want to be, they got into this to be creative, to express themselves, and finding that balance when you've got like one programmer on a team of 3 people can be really, really hard, and lots of people talk about that. Growth gets really risky, like people just don't grow because they don't have the resources to take that next step. Already talked about that. No one can afford to hire anyone, and this was a really hard thing to explain to students. Some people can afford to hire people, but you just start a thing with your friends, and like then you're a successful small team with your friends, not maybe successful enough to grow, and then so graduates just kind of do the same thing. And like Will said yesterday, like, oh, I should probably have worked at a company before I started a company, and a lot of people don't have that opportunity, right? Like they just start a company because that's the only way they can see forward. That has ramifications. Fundamentals become luxuries. Like you always see at talks at, probably at GCAP, at GDC, or like on Twitter, people are like, yeah, you need QA, you need marketing. And of course you do, but like, if you can't afford someone to like even like do the, whatever it is you do in engines, I don't know. Like, how can you, like, why do you need QA? Like, it's kind of like, obviously, I don't want to say that they're less important or more marginal, but it's like, you wouldn't hire someone to make the roof of your house if you don't have anyone to build the walls. So I was happy with that one. And this also means seniors have nowhere to go, right? They just like become subcontractors so someone can actually pay them what they're worth for 3 months, or they go somewhere else where they can get the money they're due when they're older, right? Cool, so segue, nothing feels stable. Nobody feels really, really stable. So this is kind of the age variety of people who replied to my survey. Over half were in their 20s. Over 80% were in their 20s or 30s. And this is like, some people find this really surprising, but also like, if you look at game industry surveys, historically, like the global game industry, which usually means American, the average age of a game industry rarely goes above 30 or 35. Like, they've been like just churning out. The game industry has just been like a cliff at about 35 for as long as there has been a game industry. People just leave. So that's not a new thing to this precarious situation we're in. Hi, everyone. This is the 20-year-olds. So average experience was about 5 years. 5 years ago was 2014, which is weird. 7.4 years for those who worked in companies, which is a bit better. Cool, and of course this means you don't have that history, you don't have that institutional memory. There are people who've been here longer than that, who are older than that and have that knowledge, but there's not many of them, right? We don't have, oh, this is how we did it last time, here's what you should do this time. Not everyone has access to that. I think this caused, like some existential crises, and I apologize to everyone. I really freaked out in this room who I asked this to. But people just don't see, like people just don't know where they're going to be. They just don't know. Yeah, cool. And so when I spoke to Australians overseas, like this was a large factor in why they weren't coming back to Australia, right? Like they might be working at one studio in Montreal, and they'll be like, well, if it closes down, if they give me the boot, there's like 5 others I can go and work at. And they look at Australia, and like this particular person was like, there's nothing there. And like, I don't think he means that as in you all don't count for anything. Sorry for the guys. But like, just that like, in terms of, they're in their 40s now, they're in their 50s, they have children, they have mortgages, they can't just go back to that like, let's just start a company and see what happens. And at the junior end, there's this lack of career pathways, right? Which commits to that 5-year thing. like I'm an academic, I'm a research fellow or a lecturer if I didn't have this money, and then I would be senior lecturer, associate professor, professor. I can see the people who are older than me, and that's what they are, and that's what I can be one day. And like a lot of indie devs don't have that. They don't have that, oh, that's what I will become. So just that lack of a roadmap, which doesn't help. And this impacts for diversity issues. This impacts for lack of women, non-binary, other genders, and the lack of just different kinds of people, right? Because like only a certain kind of person can do that like adventurous, risk-taking, 20-year-old entrepreneurial thing. And like, you know, the way society makes women more, you know, having to look after a family or whatever, or have to think about when they're having children in a way that maybe men don't feel pressured to think about that, means they're less likely to be like, oh, I'll just spend my entire 20s doing this and worry about my superannuation when I'm 50 or whatever. You know, same with people with different illnesses or chronic health issues. At least there's some public health and some youth allowance despite the government's best efforts in Australia. So we've got a bit better than, like, say, American little startups, but yeah. Risk is expensive and you have to be able to take risks. So that's this real, it's not just the game industry is misogynistic, which it often is, but just on this real systemic level, who has access to it. But then there's all these other people I spoke to who are, look, I work at Woolies, I'm just gonna like try to make games of a side and see what happens. And those people very generally just seemed way less stressed out and way less tired. They were just like, they weren't trying to make it a company, they weren't trying to make it a business. They were just like, if I was doing poetry, if I was starting a band, if I was like trying to become an actor, like I wouldn't just like start a business and see what happens. I would be like working my other job and I would just like see what happens. And it's really interesting, I think, in games how we think we have to go straight to the start a business, do it full time. If you're not economically sustainable, you failed. And unpacking where that comes from historically could be very interesting. I will not do that now, don't worry. But like, that's just interesting to think about. And of course, most of the people who gave these answers, quite diverse on the gender end, but still always very young. Like, there's a point where you actually realize superannuation might be a real thing that'll impact me one day, maybe. So everything's unpredictable. I swear this is the last negative one. So everything's unpredictable. Everyone's just like one foot in front of the other. Like, let's just see, I just need to get through the next week or the next game, and how that goes will depend on the next thing. I've actually written a reminder, it's not all negative in my notes here, in case I hadn't reminded that. So everyone's tired. Everyone's very tired. Again, not going to put this up here for ages, but you have the slides. You can do whatever you want to with your math brains. But like, people are all over the shop. Not too many crunches, well, in terms of like approximate hours per week, but you know, 13% said over 50, so I guess that's not great. 2% over 100. I don't know who's doing that, but stop. But also just a wide variety, and like overworking is exhausting, but also underworking is exhausting if you just can't scrape together enough contracts, or you have 5 hours a week on this game, but also you need to be on the Discord channel to like keep up with what's going on or whatever. Working part-time, that's what I said. Working on the side around a day job that isn't in games or isn't using the same part of your brain is exhausting. Just no stability is boring. But at the same time, everyone I spoke to was like really anti-crunch, like just on this kind of like aware of it as an issue in a way that I think historically game developers at large studios who are just 20-year-olds fresh out of college just don't often even think of crunch as a thing. So there's much more awareness now. Obviously, the industry's talking about that much more than it used to. But there's this real balance between like, I don't want to exploit my staff, I don't want to underpay them, I don't want to do any of that to them, but like for my game, for my IP, like this is what I have to do to be able to express myself. And in academic terms, we would call that like self-exploitation, where like you're using your own resources or your own weekends or your own time to like try to get yourself ahead. And capitalism has done a very good job of like making the individual responsible for a whole lot of these things. And yeah, so there's a lot of that, which is interesting, and just how people like balance this like, I hate crunch, but also like this thing that I own matters to me for more than just money reasons, right? So like, that's a really interesting thing that people are trying to balance. Cool, all right. I don't have a segue, but like, let's go to some positive things. So all of those things are tough. All of those things people are challenging with, struggling with, and are challenges that, I don't know, hopefully just going through that is like, oh good, it wasn't just me, everyone else is dealing with that as well. So hopefully you got that out of it, or I just depressed everyone at the end of GCAP. But what's really exciting about Australia is like, about everywhere I went, is this like, the diversity of the kinds of game makers who are here and the interactions between them. And like, I mean, even just this GCAP alone, I think, shows that in current times of what kinds of people are presenting. I think that's really, really cool. And so, like, as an overview, I guess, like, in every city I went to, you kind of had, like, I guess, like 4 different types of game maker, which overlap a lot. I want to stress the overlap. You had the tentpole companies. These are ones that students and politicians can actually name. They actually have resources, they have experience, they have an office space, they're usually sharing it with the small teams, which is awesome, maybe attached to a co-working space. You have the industry, which is all these ragtag small teams with, I guess, a business focus. They're trying to make a business work, they're trying to make it their day job. Probably working in a co-working space, probably trying to balance original IP with work for hire, et cetera, and are pretty skeptical of the scene who are, for apparently having a lack of a commercial drive, perceptively, for like, you know, the artists, the hipsters, the indies, you know, all the arty types, you know, the Melbourne game devs. As people say in Brisbane, like, I talk about like the arty devs and people are like, oh, you mean like the arcade? And I'm like, well, sort of, but also, anyway, there's like a relative thing going on there. But the scene is kind of like everyone else around the industry, the people who don't consider themselves the industry, but they're still game makers. They might be coming from an artistic background, a different kind of artistic background, I should say. And they often mistrust the industry for maybe being too commercial. And like, these are false dichotomies, obviously, right? The industry people want to express themselves. The scene people want to be able to pay their rent. So they're just like some slightly different identities and approaches. And then you have the students who are kind of like between all of them. And like, I'm an academic, so I'm biased. I taught them in that I think they are learning the right skills and tools, but like maybe not the right mindset. And I have a talk from GDC linked in the Google Doc about that if you want, where like they think they're getting into a tech industry, not a creative field. And that's, yeah, your resume, your bachelor is not going to get you anything. It's what games you've already made. Yeah, and all of these like are intermingled and overlapping, right? Like, the scene is where like talent emerges to go work in the industry and produces like cultural capital and IGF finalists. The industry like actually makes money and like can maybe mentor people and have resources. The tentpole companies need students to hire. Like it's all intermingled, and this is the whole ecosystem. It's not just an ecosystem of companies, but like just an ecosystem of different kinds of game makers. In other cities, like the ones we hold up as like poster children of like what the game industry should look like, struggle with this. Like, you speak to people in Quebec and they're like, we don't have much of a scene, which might surprise you, but they're like, all the indies are kind of forced to act like, you know, industry companies because of what kind of funding is available there and what kind of funding isn't at that low scale. And other countries struggle to have the tentpoles. Like, everywhere's like struggling to get a balance of this. And I think at a small scale, Australia's got a really good balance of these in most cities. Particularly Melbourne, obviously, but other cities as well. It's just like tiny, and if the whole thing could be scaled out together, that would be very cool. Yeah. So I also asked people whether they considered themselves part of the industry and whether they consider themselves a professional video game developer. And I've only got male and female for the gender split there because other gender diverse identity people like either didn't answer the question or there was just too few to say anything meaningful about it. Just flagging that before I get dragged on Twitter, but rightfully. But you see the split there. I'll let the numbers talk for themselves. But people who aren't at companies, you know, don't consider this as part of the industry. And it's really interesting. Like, I think, like, you know, like gamers are like, oh, anyone can be a gamer. But then you talk to the middle-aged woman who plays Angry Birds and ask them if they're a gamer. They're like, oh, no, I'm not a gamer. So it's interesting who does and doesn't feel like they have access to that identity. And it's exactly the same with video game industry and with professional video and with video game developer. So like, who does and doesn't feel like that's part of them. And I don't want to get into how can you make those words more accessible, like semantic argument. But it's just interesting what other people are out there that aren't captured by that in different ways. And this lack of a sense of professionalism is really interesting, which I think talks to kind of the scrappiness most people are working at. They don't feel professional because they look at, again, like Ubisoft or even like a large-scale slick indie company in San Francisco or something. And it's like, well, we don't even have like a candy wall, so we're you know. So I think that it's interesting there's like this identity stuff going on there. And just stressing there's all sorts of game makers out there who, you know, quite rightly think that the game industry has a history of discrimination and misogyny and other toxic issues, which it does. Like, that's just simply the truth. And so there are people there who are deciding, I want to make games, I just won't make them in this context. I'll make them in another context. And those people are out there and they're important, and they're doing some of the really like kind of out there stuff that is kind of representing Australia to the industry, and that makes maybe big indies from America or whatever, you're like, hey, there's something cool happening in that city, maybe I'll go down there for their games week. So I think like not trying to absorb that stuff into the industry, like the non-commercial stuff, but like trying to understand why it matters to you in that kind of symbiosis way is really important. And again, like, sorry, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Australia has such an incredible plurality of this, like, which other places don't, in terms of like, you know, all the big companies, a lot, not all, of the big companies left during the GFC, and it's kind of like, well, what was left over? Like, you turn the rock over, and there's all these cool, interesting, like, bugs and stuff. And I guess these are the bugs. I didn't think that one through, but like, there's just all this stuff there that you didn't know was there because like you were so focused on these big companies that drew all the attention, and like now we know they're there, and now big companies come back, hopefully we can remember they're there because they're part of what makes Australian game making really exciting. And there's just a lot of them doing a lot of interesting things. Look at the spreadsheet of games because most of them, those games are theirs. So yeah, again, I don't have a segue. So everyone I talk to is like, what do you like about Australia? What do you like making games here? And both for junior people, for people who've been around since the GFC, talk about how independent it is, talk about the tight-knit community, and like that kind of like origin story of the GFC, like it's become this origin story of like, we used to be that kind of industry, everything fell apart, and now we're this kind. And a lot of people are like, a lot of bad blood to how a lot of those studios were run. Like there was some shady stuff going on in some of the studios that don't exist anymore. And like people who were like, I got so burnt out, I got crunched into the ground, I was there all night, and now like I'm running my own small studio and I refuse to crunch anyone, and if it doesn't get made on time, we push things back as best as we can. And like it's interesting to see how that background has kind of influenced how people want to make a better, more inclusive and healthier kind of industry. And that this has given this sense of collaboration, this like we went through the war together almost thing, like we get it, we're all in this. And also like everyone worked together literally and then went and started a bunch of companies, so you know, they're still mates. And also this sense that we're like not in competition with each other, that like, you know, Goose Game isn't taking up shelf space at JB Hi-Fi or anything like that. Like there's not a competition. Whereas back in the day, you know, like some company would come in and be like, hey, I need the kart racer made for my movie franchise. Which of you two companies will do it? And someone gets a job and someone doesn't. So that's a very different competitive environment, as this person notes. Whereas now people would say, we're not competing with each other, we're competing with the world. And I really like that sentimentality. Maybe slightly nationalistic, but it's still really nice. But the aspect of all of this is that like, there's kind of like this political consciousness in Australian game makers now that didn't exist, well, that historically hasn't existed in the game industry, and that like scholars who go do research in AAA companies will just say isn't there. And so that's really interesting because people have like been burnt by that in the past. We're having discussions about how or if we bring bigger companies back again, and what does that mean into the kind of small scale stuff we have, like what are the pros, what are the cons, and we're thinking about what this means now in terms of the issues the game industry has historically had. And so, you know, so obviously everyone's excited about unionization, everyone's excited about solidarity, collectivism, all these things. Shout out the GWU Australia chapter released their own survey, 30 less people than me, whatever. But they have their own survey and their own data, and they ask different questions than me, obviously. And so if you want some more data on Australian game making, please check out their stuff as well, because it's really, really valuable and important. But this sense that like people want to do something, people want to like collectivize or make things good again, but they're like, we don't have bosses. Like it's literally just me and my 3 friends. Like, are we just going to like unionize against Daryl? Like, how do we do this? And so like people like want to like what do we do if we don't have bosses? And so I believe I have 6 minutes left. If I don't, someone can yell at me. But I guess this is a positive, like lighting the way, actually optimistic point I want to finish on after all that grim stuff. Apologies again. Is that you kind of have like the foundations here for like a very different kind of game industry event has ever existed anywhere else in the world before, which I think is really, really, really exciting and promising. And I don't have another synonym. I need a drink. So one academic reference, sorry. So Casey O'Donnell's an ethnographer in the US, and he does Viz really just like goes to a game studio and just stays there for like 6 months or whatever, and does proper deep ethnography or anthropology in these studios. And he wrote this book called The Developer's Dilemma. It came out a few years ago. The fieldwork he did was like late 2000s, early 2010s. So a little bit like, not outdated, but like a snapshot of a different time. There's this really cute sentence near the end about, there's this thing called Unity, maybe it'll become something. At the moment, no one seems to be using it. Over half of all games are made in Unity now, FYI, that's interesting. But yeah, so he points out that there's this really secretive culture in game development, really secretive and full of like self-censorship. And he compares this to like the prisoner's dilemma, where like you put a prisoner in each room, and like if they, I forget exactly, but if you like, if neither of them admit to the crime, they both get off scot-free. If one of them throws the other one under the bus, they get off scot-free, or they get 1 year, the other person gets 3 years, or if they both admit to it, they both get 2 years, or something like that. And the idea is that two individuals acting in their own self-interest do not produce the optimal outcome. And that both parties choose to protect themselves at the expense of the other participant. And he like details all these things that happen in the game industry between like NDAs, big like however many page contracts, bosses getting in trouble for going to a barbecue with people from another company, heard that in some pre-GFC interviews, all sorts of things like that, where like it just creates this like culture of just not talking about things, to the extent of like, I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to say that, so just to be sure I won't. And so like in ye olde industry, the big AAA, people just like not talk about things. And that individualizes experiences where people don't know if other people are going through the same issue, or if they're being exploited, or if they're just like, or if it's normal. And it's a big problem, essentially. But like there's no boss. Sorry, I had to do one. But there's no bosses now, right? Well, there are some bosses, but people are working at such a low scale, like, and have essentially the relative amount of power individual like game makers have compared to, you know, the big companies, I suppose, well, not the big companies, but like maybe bosses is very different. And there's kind of this like opportunity to like, again, create a different kind of game industry that isn't determined by Nintendo, that isn't determined by Ubisoft. And then when Nintendo or Ubisoft decide to set up Ubisoft Melbourne or Ubisoft Brisbane, maybe, like that would be cool, and that then maybe there's already a culture they have to deal with rather than just steamrolling over it all. And essentially a lot of this stuff like already happening. Like there already is this amazing culture of openness here, which again, like even indies in other countries working at the same scale just don't have this same sense of openness. Like I'd go and talk to a small indie studio in, again, Montreal or the Netherlands, and they'd be like, oh, we've got this game we're working on, but I can't really talk about that. And that like really threw me, because every Australian I spoke to, like every scale was like, oh, here's our unannounced title. Oh, by the way, don't tweet that. And like they knew I'm like a journalist sometimes as well, but they would still show me. It's just like totally different culture to secrecy here. So like, so people share resources, they share contacts. Hey, I'm getting on, our game's coming out on Apple, do you have a contact to like help me get on the front page? You know, hey, if you find out like one of the platforms is changing an algorithm and you're not allowed to tell anyone, but you can without getting in trouble, like do it. Share like tools and tips and approaches, share opportunities. Philip had a really great point where like getting a phone call from an investor, you don't actually want anything to do with them because you already have the money or you don't want to work with them, but you like answer the phone call and like pass them on to your mates, so someone else in Australia. Be open about how your business runs and just what low scale you're working at so that people know that's how the game industry works. You know, foster that solidarity across the ecosystem of the scene, the industry, the students. And I think we've really seen that this GCAP in terms of just like, again, people I've only ever seen presented like free play or something, and seeing them here, like watching that cross-pollination is really, really fascinating. Create collectives and stuff locally. We just had a really great community panel with people talking about this. And I had this, I will stop soon, but we had this great, I interviewed people in Montreal who were like, oh, we used to have like, and it was really good, but like it kind of stopped, it sucks, there's no real scene now. And I talked to like the one dude who was running that, and he's like, I just stopped making the Facebook event, and like, because I was tired and had a day job, and like no one else started making the Facebook event, so it just stopped. And like, that's it. Like, if you tweet that, don't name the society. I shouldn't have said that. But like, so many of these communities is run by, and in Australia too, people like complain about a collective that stopped or that used to be active and wasn't. It's like, it was literally one person, and like, you can be that one person, or you could help that one person not be one person. That's really important. Don't glorify overwork. If you're crunching, be ashamed of it. Like, you have to do it, but just don't like feel bad. Don't tweet, oh, working on a Saturday. Like, don't do that. Academics as well, just stop doing that. Yeah, make game development human and imperfect. And like, I'm not going to elaborate on this, but like, unionize against platforms, like they're the ones that have the power now. So unionize against Steam or against Unity or against Unreal. Not Unreal, they're sponsoring GCAP. So is Valve, don't unionize against them. Sorry, Terry. Sorry. Anyway, platforms are where the power is now. So I just want to end up, like, really quickly just read this one quote from an educator. I haven't really dealt with like the student issue, but like, I asked, he was talking about how many students there are, and I just like this quote, where he says, there's many talented developers in Australia who can't make the rent. Adding more students to them is not a problem. It doesn't actually hurt. You're making something bigger. If you think about it as a skill pipeline, like between the university and companies, you're only thinking of two ends of a transfer, from one private actor to another. That's not how value is presented. It's about the field rather than the industry. Those words that make you think abstractly, but also systemically about what those words own, forces you to use your brain differently. Game designer, game artist, game developers. For one thing that's so exciting about the push for unionization is it puts the power and abstract power in the hands of that category, game developers. Game developers are the most important structure, not game companies. Which I'll just point out, game developers. I feel bad taking their credit for it, but I also want to keep things anonymized. I'll let them tweet about the fact it was them if they want to. So look, just to really quickly wrap up, like, cornerly on like the theme is like, there's a lot of different ways to be a game maker, and a lot of those are very visible in Australia, which is excellent, and that ecosystem is important. And like, you're not all in the same boat because you're all trying to achieve different things, but you are all in the same ocean, I don't know, with different torches or something. So like, help each other out, but like, don't all try to be the same thing either, because you're not, and figure that out. Try to light each other's way. Thanks. Is that it? Thank you.
All right, I would now like to welcome the GCAP team up to the stage to say a few words. And for you all to welcome them as well.
Everyone up? All right. Welcome back again. Sorry, I'll let you go to the actors soon enough. But firstly, we did it, everybody. We got through 3 whole days of GCAP, which I wasn't expecting to be standing at this stage, so I'm amazed anybody else is. Before I start, I would just like to say a couple of thanks. This event would not be possible without the overwhelming generosity of our sponsors, especially our major partner, Unreal, gold tier sponsors, Creative Vic and Yodo One Games, and Wargaming Sydney, who generously supported GCAP Assist this year, and all of our other organisations that helped us out. Thank you so much. We were so happy to have your support. I would like to firstly thank Mel and Kerry for taking a chance on a very young, precocious young developer, fresh out of university, and letting him help run this event. I only graduated a couple of months ago, so it was a bit of a shock for me. But not only did they give me the chance to help run this event, but they also gave me the chance to work with a fantastic and incredibly supportive team. A huge shout out to Terry, who in addition to helping with so much of this, also took time to teach me and to coach me in a lot of, sorry, I'm not going to cry, I promise, to teach me in a lot of production work and organizational work and risk management, and to also become a very good and close friend. To Lewis and Chad, who are our phenomenal volunteer coordinators who put up with a lot of extremely bizarre questions from me. To Hannah, our actor coordinator, who isn't here because she's coordinating the actors, and those are on tonight, who went above and beyond in her role to basically not only become a huge part of the team, but also a friend as well. To our keynotes, your talks have been so insightful, uplifting, heartwarming, and heartbreaking that I thank you so much for coming down to Australia to share that with us. To Ray for her hard work presenting, as well as being very, very, very patient with me, consistently checking and rechecking our run sheets. And to all of you, because we know that all eyes were on us this year, because it was an entirely new team running GCAP, and we were striving for 3 days instead of 2, which a lot of people sort of asked us why we were doing that. We have poured our lives into this for months, and I cannot tell you how nice it is to see so many happy faces. And before I close, I would like to touch on what lighting the way meant to me. I entered this industry with absolutely no idea what to expect of it. I was a young, strange writing dude, you know, fresh out of TAFE, where it was not a good time, and fresh into a public transition. I was worried that people would not be ready to accept transgender stories or even able to accept me for who I am. And I was met with open arms. I was able to speak about my experiences, and I was able to educate and to represent. The way forward for me was to create a safer industry, but in a lot of ways, we are already on our way. I have seen so many people talking at this GCAP between genders, between young and old, and between sexualities, and everybody has been getting along so well. Diversity is being welcomed and championed in our industry. And I just can't think of a better group of people to step forward with and to continue making our industry the best that it can be. Thank you all so much. I have one final thanks, and perhaps an incredibly important thanks, because we could not run this event without them. I would like to get all of our GCAP volunteers up on stage who have done an incredible job this year. Come on up.
And that's it, everyone. The actors are on tonight. The doors open at 7 o'clock. There is food being served at 7:45, so if you can hold out, you can eat for free once again. I'll see you all there.